Imagine you were given such a specific brief on a car that it had to be British, a V12, a manual, and under £35,000. What would it be? Well, let's just pretend for a second that someone gave us that brief and we found it. Of course, it is our Aston Martin DB7 Vantage V12 manual. It was only a few short weeks ago that myself and Dan had sat down with a gap in our timetable really and just having a think about some of the cars that should have taken off in the classic or the modern classic car market more than they should have done. And one of the cars that I hadn't spent a massive amount thinking about until more recently is the Aston Martin DB7. And the DB7 for me was one of those cars 10 or so, maybe 15 years ago, where I just didn't care. Now I appreciate that's probably an age thing as well, but judging by the market and the popularity of them at the moment, I think that a lot of other people were in the same kind of boat and the same kind of opinion. Now I think there's probably quite a few reasons why that might be. And I think one of the biggest reasons may be because this was the first, or one of the first, mass-produced Aston Martins that they ever did, and it became a little bit more accessible to the masses for quite a period. So to add to that, a brief history of the DB7. DB7 came out in 1993 in a coupe. In an inline 6, which was a Jaguar engine that had been supercharged, 3.2 supercharged, producing a little over 350 horsepower. Now, as I say, when the DB7 brief was done, the brand hadn't really done an awful lot for quite a while in terms of new models, and certainly didn't have many models in the marketplace. So I think reading between the lines and looking at what they did, it was a car that they wanted to make more of, make more appealing, more attractive pricing, and as I say, ultimately make more of a success for the company and for customers. So over the whole lifespan between 93 and 2004, there was around about 7,000 DB7s made in totality. And most people would probably be quite surprised to hear that the majority of those were actually the V12s, even though they were available for a shorter period of time. And I think really that's probably because when you think of an Aston Martin, you think of a V8 or a V12. That's a historic thing. The inline 6 thing was something that obviously they borrowed from Jaguar. The DB7 was designed in conjunction with the XKR. There was a similar, or crossover of design teams and design management and things like that. So I think that probably had a large part to play. And also, as I say, because they were trying to go out to the masses that little bit more, they wanted to try and keep the cost down so they could pass that saving on, so it was actually more accessible. So they borrowed things from other manufacturers, like switchgear, like engines, like styling cues and things like that. So moving away from the engineering side, the immediates, the engine, the gearbox, the styling, from an inside perspective, from a cabin and things, the car has borrowed a lot of parts, and there's good reason for that. When anybody designs a car, the research and development and the making of parts costs an incredible amount of money and time, and the time costs money as well. So when you're designing these things, indicator stalks, buttons, clusters, steering wheels, things, it makes, as I say, the process very expensive, and ultimately have to pass that cost onto the price of the car and the consumer, or it's just not going to work. So what Aston Martin did very cleverly was approach the likes of Ford, and obviously Ford are, so huge. Their R&D costs, their research and development costs, are covered in their normal models tenfold, and still making a profit very early on. So Aston Martin approached them and spoke to them around about the cars like the Scorpios, the Granadas, the Mondeos, the Focus actually, in slightly the later cars, and all the buttons for the heated seats, the heated screen, the rear screen, the indicator stalks, as I say, even just down to the steering wheel shape and everything else. They're out of Fords. And I think that became a little bit of a running joke with a lot of people, that if they were spending, you know, £150,000 or whatever it might have been, dependent on the car, they didn't want Ford switchgear in there. And I get it, I do understand that. But as I say, there is absolutely good reason for these things. And I think those people that bought those cars, they bought them for a reason, or they wanted to buy them for a reason. They like the styling and so on and so forth. But if someone had said to every single person that bought those cars new, well, I'm very sorry, yes, I know that you wanted Aston Martin switchgear, things that had not been in any other cars ever before, but the price was another £30,000, which would have been easy to do across, you know, probably more. It would have been very easy to do across 7,000 units. And bearing in mind, back in '93, Aston Martin had absolutely no clue how many they were going to make, and certainly not spanning over a 10 or 11 year life cycle. So, you know, passing that cost on to others, I would imagine it would have made enough of a difference that people either wouldn't have bought them, or they would have ended up going to a different clientele. So it's an important part of the car's history. All these little things add up to a huge thing that ultimately could have made or broken the life cycle and the history of the DB7. Another reason that I think it was a good idea, especially now as the cars are coming into this classic and modern classic status, things break a lot. You know, there's a hazard switch on here that's got a split across it and it sticks in. Well, if that was an Aston Martin part, it'd either be obsolete, it'd be £1 million on back order, whatever it might have been, and you'd end up with an unsightly switch. Well, I'm very pleased to say that we've got that switch. It was bought off eBay for £4.50 and it takes about 3 minutes to fit. That's not supercar pricing, and it's certainly not supercar type maintenance. And I think it's part of the reason that these cars are so accessible now. As I say, under £35,000. You can go and buy an Aston Vantage, a DB7 Vantage as a V12, if it was an automatic 50, 60, 70,000 mile car, for early 20s quite easily, and it will be a fabulous car. And as long as it's had the right maintenance, it will be a fantastic car for many, many years to come as well. Another funny little known fact about the DB7 is that the rear lights were, again, borrowed from another car. You wouldn't guess it, because Aston were very, very clever in the trimmings and the shape that they put them in, made them look a certain shape, whereas actually the lenses behind that cover were of a completely different shape. They were designed to be just an oblong, and very, very boring and not really very sexy at all. And they were borrowed, or they were used, from a Mazda 323F, which again was in the early 90s a very, very, very easily obtainable car. And Mazda, again, this is getting very, very into it now, but Mazda actually always had affiliations with Ford. They quite often use their engines in conjunction with one another, and the Ford Fiesta of the mid-90s to 2000s, Mazda did a comparison of, which was a Mazda 121. So, you know, again, Aston were very clever. They obviously went to a brand that they knew that they could pinch bits from. It wasn't going to cost an awful lot of money. There was probably surplus stock from all these manufacturers at the time. They've continued to have to make them, and there's spare parts going forward into now, and there's aftermarket parts as well. So as I mentioned earlier, Aston Martin's history, or a brief overview of their history, they obviously started in 1913 as a founded company, and started to make their first cars in 1915. But unfortunately, as we'd gone into the First World War, things were put on hold for a little while. A luxury car of that nature wasn't needed. Obviously staff and owners and things had to go and fight and so on and so forth, so it didn't take off for a little while. But as we came into the early 1920s, models started coming out, and they grew and grew from there. They were always, from day one, very opulent cars, very pretty, big-engined, luxurious and niche, and that's what they've always carried through in their history, really. And fast forwarding all the way through to the 70s, the main core of Aston's cars were the V8 Virage and the V8 Vantage, and they were wonderful. They were very, very iconic Aston Martins. They're worth an absolute fortune now, for a good example. But as it came up to late 80s and early 90s, companies like that were not going to be able to survive for an awful long time, because they just needed to be selling more, making more to continue the brand. You know, limited number manufacturers, unless their prices are galactic, just didn't work. So the inline six DB7 was the answer to that. It was that car that they wanted to make more of, sell more of, keep costs lower. So it worked. The DB7 ended up sprouting the successors to the Virage and the V8 Vantage into the new Vantage. Ran with the DB7 for a long time, and then became the DB9, the Virage off the back of that, and you had your Volantes and so on and so forth, and then they've continued into the Rapides and so on and so forth, and then now the latest up-to-date models, there's loads, and it's a huge brand that's actually doing exceptionally well now. It's gone through a lot of turmoil with a lot of lack of backing and debts and things like that, but luckily the money has been raised by the right investors that understand the brand, want and have the passion, and it's continued to grow and do exceptionally well, although a very different brand to what it was back in the 70s, 80s and 90s. So what about our car? Where does this one sit in the line of price, age, ownership and everything else? Well, this one is a 2000 on an X, and it's a V12 manual, as I said, with 26 or just shy of 26,500 miles, and only 2 former keepers. So that's a pretty rare combination to find. We were exceptionally lucky when someone approached us and we jumped at it with both hands. Price wise, we've marketed the car at £31,950, and actually when you really look at things like that, where on earth are you going to get a car with this much looks, historic presence, mileage, ownership? It's just exceptional. It still looks like such an incredible, expensive car, and actually it's less than a 2-year-old Hyundai family car. It's ridiculous. And let's be completely frank, maintenance aside, the price of the car, it's only going to go one way, and it's through the roof. It's got to, surely. Name another, and if someone can put one in the comments, name another V12 manual sports car under £35,000. I can't think of any, not even close. One of the funnier things that I really liked about this car was the colour combination of and the aesthetics behind it. I know it's not quite James Bond, but you'll remember in the early 2000s, Rowan Atkinson did a film series called Johnny English, and in the first car, in the first film even, the car that he had was a DB7 V12 Vantage in the exact colour combination that we have here, which is a dark blue over an ivory hide with blue top dash. And I just, as soon as we were sent the photos, I just thought, that's so cool. I know it's not crazy money and everything else, but I do remember, and Rowan Atkinson is a wonderful actor, but he's also a huge petrol head, and he really can drive. And that film brought that car to life massively. I just remember hearing it and seeing it and just thinking, goodness gracious me, one day I want one of those cars. Maintenance and history on Aston Martins. Well, if you're going to an Aston Martin main agent and you're expecting this car to go in there every year for a routine service and never have anything wrong, it's not the right car for you. However, if you look at this car as a modern classic, a classic car in its own right, classic cars are a constant working project, and so they should be. As a result, they're a little bit temperamental sometimes. They shouldn't always work 100% brand new and perfect and it's intended for the factory, that's no fun. And let's be honest, at 30 years old, or coming up to 30 years old for this particular one, by the time I was 15, let alone 25 or 30, I'd bumped my knees, I'd cut myself, I'd got a scar here, there and everywhere, and that's part of the car's history. But it's the same with maintenance. There's going to be things wrong. Now, that may put a lot of people off owning these, because whilst they might be able to afford it, they might not be able to afford to run it, which I get. I totally understand it. But if we look at this particular car's history, it had, in the last 4 years, and this is only over 2 visits at Aston Martin Works and a specialist independent, it's had the thick end of £20,000 spent on it. And again, that might worry people, which I understand in total, I really do. But a lot of the work that was done wasn't done as a knee-jerk, that's broken, I've got to do it. It was preventative measures, it was upgrades and future-proofing the car. So all of the big things that need to be done, spark plugs and coils, all the corrosion protection underneath, the water pump and coolant leaks that have plagued the earlier cars, they're all done, and the future-proof with more modern parts as technology's advanced. So there is absolutely no reason for me to think, genuinely, that this car is going to need anything other than normal maintenance to keep it on the road usable as a second car, a usable car that can be enjoyed at the weekends for 10 years plus. I really do. A lot of people, when we launched this on social media, asked me what it drove like, and I think it's quite easily explained, to be honest. It is very it's very similar in how it feels and how it drives and how it reacts to a semi-modern Range Rover. It's incredibly comfortable, it glides, the steering isn't a hugely quick rack or anything like that, it just goes where you want it to go in a nice easy fashion. It sounds great, it feels confidence inspiring, the brakes are really nice and sharp, there's very low road noise, you've got very good insulation and everything else that goes with that. So I would say it's a sports version of a Range Rover opulent type drive. That would be my summary quite as well as I could do. So a summary, do I love it? Absolutely. Would I buy one? I want it. Am I going to be able to find another one? Probably not, I'm afraid. Probably not. Probably not. And that does frustrate me. But we're not here to keep them. We're here to do a job. We're here to form relationships, earn a living, keep people in jobs, enjoying what we do, and that's what we'll continue to do for as long as we can. But these kind of cars are going to do that the best way, in the best way possible. It's going to enable us to continue that. But for now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the long way home, because I can. I'm going to put Classic FM on, put the window down, and just enjoy this wonderful thing. Thank you.